The perfect life before the storm. James Carter stood in the marble bathroom of the grand ballroom, adjusting his tailored Armani tuxedo one final time. He looked at himself in the mirror and could barely recognize the man staring back. His jet black hair was perfectly styled, his sharp jawline freshly shaved, and his bright blue eyes gleamed with anticipation. Today was the day he had been waiting for, the day everything would finally be perfect. At 38 years old, James had built an empire from nothing. His tech startup, CyberVault, had revolutionized data security and made him a billionaire by 35. But wealth and success meant nothing compared to what he felt standing here in this moment, knowing that Olivia Hayes would soon be his wife. Olivia was everything he had dreamed of after the heartbreak of his past. She was 29 years old, with long, honey-blonde hair that cascaded down her back like a waterfall. She came from old money and carried herself with the grace and poise of someone born into privilege. Their relationship had been a whirlwind romance, spanning just 2 years, but it felt like destiny. The moment they met at a charity gala in Manhattan, James knew she was the one. The guest list included 500 of the most influential people in New York. High-powered executives, celebrities, and politicians filled the ballroom. The decorations were breathtaking. White roses and crystal chandeliers adorned every corner. The string quartet was already playing soft melodies as guests were seated. The wedding planner had executed everything perfectly. James stepped out of the bathroom and walked through the backstage area toward the main hall. His best man and brother, David, was waiting for him. David was 5 years younger, with similar features but a more laid-back demeanor. He clapped James on the shoulder with a grin. "Brother, you look like a man who is about to marry the love of his life," David said warmly. "I am, David. I have never been more sure of anything," James replied, his voice steady and confident. "This is my second chance at happiness, and I am not going to waste it." David smiled, though there was a flicker of something unreadable in his expression. James noticed it but dismissed it as nerves. He turned to look out toward the main ballroom and saw the guests beginning to settle into their seats. The wedding march would begin any moment now. James walked out to the altar and took his position at the end of the aisle. His heart was racing. His palms were slightly sweaty. He looked out at the sea of faces, people he knew, people who cared about him, people who had watched him work himself to the bone building his business. Now they were here to celebrate his personal victory. The music began, the classical strains of Pachelbel's canon filling the grand space. Everyone stood up. The bridesmaids began their walk down the aisle in their elegant lavender gowns. Each one smiled at James as they passed, but he barely registered their faces. His entire being was focused on one moment, the moment when Olivia would appear. Then the wedding march began. The unmistakable opening notes of Mendelssohn echoed through the ballroom. James felt tears beginning to form in his eyes. He was actually doing this. He was finally moving forward from the tragedy and pain of his past relationship. He thought briefly of Madison, of the bitter breakup 5 years ago, of the anger and hurt that had nearly destroyed him. But he pushed those thoughts away. This was a new chapter. This was redemption. The doors at the back of the chapel opened, and James saw her. Olivia looked absolutely radiant in her custom-made white gown. The dress was strapless, with thousands of hand-sewn crystals that caught the light, making her look like she was walking through a cloud. Her veil was delicate and elegant. Her father beamed with pride as he walked her slowly down the aisle toward the altar, toward James. James felt his knees weaken slightly as she approached. This was really happening. His new life was beginning right now in this moment. Nothing could ruin this. Nothing could take this away from him. As Olivia reached the altar and her father placed her hand in James's, they gazed into each other's eyes. The minister stepped forward and began the ceremony. James was so focused on Olivia that he barely heard the opening words. The love in her eyes was unmistakable and pure. But then something shifted. The atmosphere in the room changed subtly at first, almost imperceptible. James did not notice it immediately, but the guests did. A murmur rippled through the crowd. heads turning toward the back entrance. At first, it was just a sound, the heavy wooden doors creaking open. All eyes turned away from the altar toward the entrance, and then everyone froze. There in the doorway stood a figure that made James' blood run cold. A woman in a stunning crimson-red gown. Her dark auburn hair was styled in waves that framed her face perfectly. Her makeup was flawless, her presence commanding. She walked into the ballroom with the confidence of someone who owned the place. Behind her came three figures, two tall men in dark suits, clearly lawyers or security professionals, and a woman with a sharp expression and a briefcase. It was Madison Miller. James felt the world tilt beneath his feet. His mouth went dry. All color drained from his face. Olivia gasped beside him, her hand gripping his arm tightly. The entire ballroom fell into shocked silence. Madison walked forward with deliberate steps, her red heels clicking against the marble floor. She did not break eye contact with James, not for a single moment. Her face was a mask of controlled fury mixed with something else, something that looked almost like satisfaction. The moment everything changed had just arrived.
Secrets and demands. Madison stopped at the center of the ballroom, her red gown seeming to glow under the crystal chandeliers. She did not say a word at first. She simply looked at James with an intensity that made his stomach churn. The room was completely silent. Not even a whisper could be heard. The guests seemed to be holding their collective breath. James felt Olivia trembling beside him. He wanted to say something, anything to break the suffocating tension, but no words came. His mind was racing through the possibilities. Why was Madison here? What did she want? It had been 5 years since their breakup, and he had built an entirely new life. What could possibly bring her back now, with lawyers and investigators in tow? Finally, Madison opened her mouth and spoke. Her voice was smooth, but edged with steel. "Hello, James. I hope I am not interrupting anything important." She gestured around the ballroom, at the shocked faces of 500 guests. "I see you are getting married. How wonderful for you." James felt his heart pounding in his chest. He managed to find his voice, though it came out hoarse and uncertain. "Madison, what are you doing here? This is not the time or place." Madison smiled coldly. "Oh, but it is exactly the time and place." She took a few more steps forward. The lawyers remained at the back of the room, like silent sentries. "Everything about this moment needed an audience, James, and I wanted to give you that." Olivia stepped forward, her voice shaking. "Who is this woman, James, and why is she interrupting our wedding?" Madison extended her hand toward Olivia with mock graciousness. "Madison Miller. James and I have quite a history together." She turned her attention back to James. "You never told your beautiful new bride about me, did you? About us? About what you did to me?" James' jaw clenched. He could feel the eyes of every single guest upon him burning into his skin. All those business associates? All those family friends watching this moment unfold in real time? It would be everywhere within hours, on social media, in the news. He had to control this situation somehow. "Madison, I think you should leave," James said, trying to sound authoritative. But his voice wavered, revealing his fear. Madison seemed to enjoy this immensely. "Oh, leave? Oh, no, James. I am not going anywhere until we have had a proper conversation. You see, I have spent the last 5 years doing something very productive. I have been investigating you." James felt the blood drain from his face. "Investigation? What are you talking about?" Madison gestured to the woman with the briefcase, who stepped forward. The woman opened the briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of documents. Madison took several pages and held them up to the light. You remember when we were together, James? You remember our business dealings? You remember how you told me your tech company was struggling and I invested my entire trust fund into CyberVault? I gave you $5 million. James remembered. But Madison, we had a contract. Everything was fair and above board. Fair and above board? Madison laughed bitterly. James, you embezzled from that investment account. You secretly transferred my money into shell corporations and used it to fund your personal development projects. Then you kept all the profits for yourself. You never told me about any of it, and when I started asking questions, you ended our relationship to silence me. The entire ballroom erupted in gasps and murmurs. James felt Olivia release his arm. She stepped away from him, her face pale and shocked. That is a lie, James. That is a lie, James said desperately. Those are fabrications. That money was accounted for. Is it? Madison pulled out more documents. These are from forensic accountants certified by the state of New York. They have traced every dollar. My money, James. Your embezzlement is documented and recorded. One of the lawyers stepped forward and placed a business card at the altar. It landed at James' feet. You are being sued for breach of fiduciary duty, fraud, and theft. The amount we are seeking is $50 million. That includes the original investment, interest, and punitive damages, the lawyer said calmly. But that is not all, Madison continued. Her eyes glinted with something darker. Do you remember our prenuptial agreement, James? The one you had me sign before we got engaged? James' heart began to race. He remembered that agreement, but what could possibly? That agreement contained a clause, Madison said slowly. You probably thought you were being clever when you added it. A clause that states if you commit infidelity during our marriage, I receive a 50% settlement of all your assets. I found evidence, James, evidence of your infidelity during our relationship, before you officially ended things. James felt the room spinning. He opened his mouth to respond, but Madison cut him off. So, here is what is going to happen, James. You are going to end this wedding. You are going to come with my team to my lawyer's office and we are going to negotiate a settlement. You are going to pay me every cent you owe me. And if you refuse, I will make sure every detail of your crimes and your betrayals are made public, starting with the SEC, starting with the FBI, and ending with every news outlet in this country. Olivia turned to James with tears streaming down her face. Tell me this is not true, James. Tell me this is some kind of sick misunderstanding. James looked at his bride, feeling like the walls were closing in on him. He had no words that could fix the situation. Madison had him exactly where she wanted him, trapped and exposed with no escape route.
When love meets deception, James stood frozen at the altar while chaos erupted around him. The wedding guests were standing up, talking loudly, pointing, taking photographs with their phones. The moment would be viral within minutes. The most humiliating moment of his life, broadcast to thousands within hours. He could see his mother in the front row with her hand over her mouth, his father looking utterly shocked and disappointed. You need to leave, James said firmly to Madison. His voice had found some of its strength. Your business with you is not something that should be discussed in front of 500 people at my wedding. This is blackmail, and it is illegal. Madison laughed, that cold, cutting sound that echoed through the silent ballroom. Blackmail, James? I am simply presenting you with the facts. I am offering you a choice. You can either settle this civilly with me, or you can face the legal system. Unfortunately for you, the evidence against you is ironclad. Either way, the truth is coming out. Olivia suddenly found her voice amidst the shock. Tell me everything right now, James, she demanded, tears now streaming down her face. I deserve to know what is happening. What did you do to her? Who is this woman really? James turned to Olivia, desperately wanting to explain, but Madison cut in before he could speak. Oh, Olivia, is it? James did not tell you the wonderful story of our love affair. Did he not mention that we lived together for 3 years? Did he not mention that I was going to marry him too once upon a time? That I was engaged to him and he destroyed me?" The word destroyed hung in the air like a physical thing. Olivia looked between James and Madison, trying to piece together the narrative that was unfolding before her eyes. "James and I had something real, Olivia," Madison continued. Her voice softened for a moment, revealing a hint of genuine pain. "But James was ambitious. He saw an opportunity. He saw my money, my trust fund, my family connections, and he used me. He promised me forever, and then he stole from me, and when I threatened to tell people, he simply left me. He erased me from his life like I was nothing, like I had never mattered." "That is not what happened," James began, but his voice sounded weak, even to his own ears. "Then what did happen?" Madison challenged, stepping closer to him. "If it is not what I said, then tell her, James. Tell your new bride how you really ended things. Tell her about the infidelity. Tell her about the night she found you with someone else in our apartment. Tell her how you paid for her silence." James felt his world crumbling beneath his feet. Madison was twisting the truth, mixing reality with exaggeration and lies. But some of it was true. Some of what she was saying contained kernels of truth that made her narrative believable. David suddenly stepped forward from the side of the altar. His face was flushed with anger. "Brother, you have to say something. You cannot let her do this." But James did not know what to say. He had spent years building a narrative about his past with Madison. He had told himself that their relationship was toxic and unhealthy, that they wanted different things, that it had simply run its course. He had convinced himself that his feelings for Madison were merely mistakes of youth, misunderstandings that had been blown out of proportion. But looking at Madison now, seeing the controlled fury and pain radiating from her, he realized that whatever his story had been, hers was different. Hers was a story of betrayal and abandonment. Her truth was that he had used her and discarded her without mercy. One of the lawyers stepped forward again with another document. This one appeared to be an official filing. "We have formally filed suit against James Carter and his company CyberVault," the lawyer stated in an official tone. "The charges include embezzlement, fraud, breach of contract, and violation of the prenuptial agreement. You will be receiving service of process tomorrow morning, Mr. Carter. I suggest you contact your legal representation immediately." Olivia backed away from James further, her white wedding dress suddenly seeming like a costume for a play that was ending badly. "I cannot believe this is happening right now," she whispered. "I thought I knew you, James. I thought you were different from all the other men in this world. I thought you were good and honest and—" She could not finish her sentence. The tears were coming harder now, and James wanted nothing more than to reach out and comfort her. But he knew that anything he said or did right now would only make things worse. Madison moved toward the exit of the ballroom, her team following behind her. She paused at the doors and turned back to look at James one final time. "I gave you a chance to be honest 5 years ago, when I first confronted you about the missing money. I gave you opportunities to make this right, James. But you chose to ignore me. You chose to pretend I did not exist. You chose to move on and build a new life with a new woman without ever taking responsibility for what you did to me. Well, now everyone in this city will know exactly who you really are." With that, Madison walked out of the ballroom, followed by her lawyers and investigator, leaving behind a room full of shocked, stunned, and deeply conflicted people. James stood at the altar in his perfect tuxedo, surrounded by 500 witnesses to what would become the biggest scandal in New York City high society in years. His wedding was over. His empire was under siege. His future was uncertain, and the woman he was supposed to marry was looking at him like he was a complete stranger. Olivia turned and walked off the altar, pulling her dress behind her. The wedding guests began to murmur loudly now, shocked conversations breaking out everywhere. James stood alone at the altar, feeling utterly defeated, realizing that Madison had taken everything from him without even staying long enough to see the full destruction of his carefully constructed world. And yet somewhere beneath all that pain and humiliation, James found himself thinking about Madison. He found himself remembering the good times before everything went wrong. He found himself wondering if everything she had said was true, if he had truly been the monster she had painted him to be, and if there was any way to undo the damage he had caused to the woman he had once loved more than anything in the world.
The truth unravels.
3 days had passed since the wedding disaster, and James was sitting in his penthouse office on the 52nd floor, looking out at the Manhattan skyline. The view that once filled him with pride and accomplishment now felt hollow and meaningless. His phone had been ringing constantly with calls from board members, investors, and reporters, all demanding answers, all hungry for scandal. He had instructed his lawyers to issue a statement denying all charges, but the damage was already catastrophic. CyberVault stock had plummeted 40% in a single day. 2 major clients had terminated their contracts. 3 board members had resigned, publicly declaring they could not work with someone of questionable moral character. The FBI had indeed opened an investigation. The SEC was reviewing his financial records. It was a complete and utter collapse of everything he had built. But what tortured James most was not the professional destruction. It was Olivia. She had not answered a single call or message in 3 days. Her family had issued a statement saying they were consulting with their lawyers regarding the dissolution of the engagement. James had tried going to her apartment, but the doorman refused to let him up. He had sent dozens of flowers. Each arrangement returned unopened. Then, on the 4th morning, James made a decision. He could not sit idle any longer. He needed to see Madison face to face. He needed to look her in the eyes and understand exactly what had transpired between them. He needed to know if her accusations were completely true or if there was some distortion of reality that had led to this catastrophic confrontation. James found her address through a private investigator and drove to her townhouse in Brooklyn Heights. It was a beautiful, historic home overlooking the water. James wondered how she had afforded it, given that she claimed he had stolen her money. Then he realized she must have rebuilt her life without him. She must have moved on and found success on her own terms. Madison answered the door herself. She was wearing casual clothes, a simple white sweater and jeans. Her face showed no makeup. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She looked younger this way, more vulnerable. But her eyes remained guarded. "I wondered when you would show up here," Madison said, without inviting him inside. "We need to talk," James replied. "I need to understand what happened between us, Madison. I need to know the truth." "The truth," Madison scoffed, stepping aside to let him enter the townhouse. She led him to a modern living room with large windows overlooking the water. The interior was tastefully decorated, but James noticed something. He noticed photographs on shelves. Pictures of Madison with other people, traveling, laughing, building a life. She had not just survived after their breakup, she had thrived. "Do you want coffee?" Madison asked coldly. "No, I want answers," James said firmly. "I want to know what really happened between us. 5 years ago when you said I stole from you, I told you that you were mistaken. I showed you the records. I proved that your investment was accounted for. You accepted that explanation. You said you understood that we had simply grown apart and wanted different things. Why have you suddenly decided to come back now with this elaborate scheme with lawyers and evidence?" Madison sat down on her couch and gestured for James to do the same. For a long time, she did not speak. She simply stared out the window toward the water. "Because I finally found the courage to face what you did to me," she said quietly. "Not just the money, James, though yes, you did steal that. It took me years and a good forensic accountant to trace where it really went. You buried it in shell corporations. You hid it so well that even you probably convinced yourself it was legitimate. But it was theft, James. It was theft and embezzlement, whether you want to admit it or not. But that is not why I came back. That is not why I showed up at your wedding," Madison continued. She turned to look at him, and he saw tears forming in her eyes. "For years after we broke up, I told myself that I was fine, that I had moved on, and that what happened between us did not matter anymore. But every time I saw your picture in a magazine, every time I read about your success, I felt this burning rage inside me. Because I knew that my money had built that empire. I knew that without you, you would have failed. And yet you had completely erased me. You rewrote our history. You told people that we had a terrible relationship, that I was controlling and needy and unstable." James wanted to interrupt, but Madison held up her hand.
Then I heard that you were getting married. I heard that you're standing up in front of 500 people to start a new chapter, to make a new beginning. And suddenly, all of that rage came back. I realized that you were going to do it again. You were going to use another woman. You were going to take what she had to offer. You were going to build on her connections, her money, her family name, and then when you no longer needed her, you would discard her just like you discarded me. James stood up from the couch. I never deliberately hurt you, Madison. I never woke up in the morning thinking about how I could use you. I was young and ambitious and scared, and yes, maybe I made mistakes. But I was not the villain in our story. Mistakes? Madison stood up too, her voice rising. You call it mistakes. I call it manipulation. I call it predatory behavior, James. You saw me as a means to an end, and when I started to become a liability, you got rid of me. Then show me, James said desperately. Show me the evidence. Show me these forensic accounting records. If you are so certain that I committed these crimes, then show me the proof. Madison walked to a desk drawer and pulled out the thick stack of documents she had shown at the wedding. She thrust them into his hands. Page 47, she said. Through the original investment account to the Meridian Shell Corporation. Page 52, the transfer from Meridian to Nexus Holdings. Page 54, Nexus Holdings to 3 separate accounts in your name. Every single transaction documented. Every single dollar traced. Every single lie you told yourself exposed. James looked through the documents. His hands were shaking. As he read through the financial trail, he realized something horrifying. The numbers were real. The transfers were real, but James had no memory of initiating them. He had no recollection of creating these shell corporations. He had no memory of moving money around like this. What? James said slowly, looking up from the documents. I did not do this, Madison. I did not create these shell corporations. I did not move this money. Then who did? Madison asked coldly. You were the only one with access to those accounts. You were the only one who knows the passwords. You were the only one who could have orchestrated this. James' mind was racing. A terrible thought was beginning to form in his consciousness. A thought so disturbing that he could barely articulate it. David, he whispered, my brother, David, has access to everything. He sits on the board. He has the passwords for the backup systems. He helped me build the company from the ground up. Madison's face suddenly grew pale. You think your brother did this? James looked at her with dawning horror and said, I think my brother framed me for embezzlement 5 years ago, and I think you have been blaming me for crimes that he committed.
Redemption and reckoning. Madison and James spent the next 6 hours going through every single document, examining every transaction, tracing every digital footprint. It became increasingly clear that the financial trail did not lead to James. It led directly to David. David had access to everything. David had the knowledge to create shell corporations. David had the motive. James suddenly remembered conversations he had overheard years ago. David complaining about never getting credit. David feeling overlooked by investors. David saying that James got all the attention, while he did all the real work. By the time they finished analyzing the evidence, Madison was as shocked as James was. The realization that she had spent 5 years planning revenge against the wrong person was devastating. She had built her entire crusade on false assumptions, on evidence that seemed damning, but was actually a carefully constructed frame. I am so sorry, Madison said, her voice breaking. I came into that wedding with so much anger, so much certainty that you were guilty, and I ruined everything. I ruined your life, your engagement, your reputation, all based on evidence that I did not fully investigate. James took her hands in his. I understand why you did it, he said gently. You thought you were exposing a predator. You thought you were getting justice for what you believed he had done to you. But Madison, we need to go to the authorities with this. We need to expose David. We need to tell the truth to everyone. The next morning, James met with federal investigators and brought them the financial evidence. David was arrested at his home. For years, he had been embezzling from Cybervault, feeding his gambling addiction and maintaining an elaborate lifestyle. He had also stolen from Madison 5 years earlier, knowing that James would be blamed for it. David had orchestrated the entire scheme, using his access to the company's systems and his knowledge of his brother's inside workings. The investigation revealed that David had deliberately manipulated the evidence to turn Madison and James against each other. He had known that if Madison believed James had stolen from her, she would either come forward herself or stay silent, consumed by rage and betrayal. Either way, David would benefit from the chaos. David had even left financial breadcrumbs leading back to James, while carefully covering his own tracks. He had been planning this for years, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Within weeks, the truth was public. James was exonerated, Cybervault's stock rebounded, clients returned, investors showed renewed confidence. The SEC and FBI closed their investigations, declaring James innocent of all charges. David faced multiple federal charges and was sentenced to 15 years in prison for fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. But the personal damage was far more complicated to repair. Olivia agreed to meet with James 2 weeks after his exoneration. They met at a coffee shop near her apartment, not at the fancy restaurants where they used to go, not at romantic locations, but a simple, quiet place where they could talk. "James, I want to believe you," she said, stirring her coffee slowly. "I want to believe that you are innocent and that this was all your brother, but how do I know that you are telling me the truth? How do I know that you did not orchestrate this entire revelation to win me back?" "You don't," James said honestly. "You will have to make a choice. You will have to decide whether you trust me or whether you don't. There is no evidence I can show you, no proof I can give you that will erase the doubt. I understand that." Olivia looked out the window for a long time. Finally, she said, "I have been talking to a therapist about all of this, and she helped me realize something. I fell in love with the image of you, with the idea of you, with your wealth and status and success. I did not fall in love with the real James because I realized I did not actually know the real James. I still don't." James felt his heart sink as she continued. "But I would like to know him," she said, turning back to him. "I would like to actually get to know the real James Carter, without the pressure of wedding plans, without the weight of expectation. I would like to start over, this time for real." And so they began again, slowly, carefully, deliberately. Olivia and James went on dates like normal people. They talked about their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. They built something genuine this time, not based on surface attraction, but on real connection. That genuine connection grew over time. And eventually, Olivia began to trust James again. Not because of grand gestures or promises, but because of his consistent actions, his honesty, and his willingness to be vulnerable. As for Madison, she and James discovered that the chemistry between them had not completely faded. Yes, they had history, but they also had clarity now. They understood each other in ways that no one else could. They had both been victims of David's deception. They had both learned the price of jumping to conclusions. They had both learned about forgiveness. One evening, James and Madison were sitting on her townhouse balcony overlooking the water, the same balcony where they had first talked about what had happened. Madison said, "I never thought I would feel this way about you again. I spent so long hating you. I never stopped thinking about you." James admitted, "I tried to push the memories away, but they were always there, always nagging at me, always making me wonder what our life could have been if circumstances had been different." Madison took his hand and squeezed it gently. "We cannot go back to what we were, but maybe we can build something new, something better, something based on truth instead of lies." James realized in that moment that he faced a genuine choice between two women.
He loved them both, but in very different ways. Olivia represented his future, his chance at stability and genuine partnership. Madison represented his past, his unfinished business, his greatest regret. After weeks of soul-searching, James made his decision. He chose to focus on building his relationship with Olivia. He realized that Madison was someone he cared for deeply, but their past was too complicated and painful. Their reunion, born out of mutual victimization, would never be as healthy as what he and Olivia were building. He and Madison would always have that shared experience, and that would forever connect them, but it was not enough to build a future on. He met with Madison one last time to explain his decision. She understood. It hurt, but she understood. They promised to remain friends, to support each other through the healing process, and to honor what they had learned from each other. 2 years later, James and Olivia got married again, this time in a small, intimate ceremony with only their closest family and friends. This time, the wedding was about genuine love, not image or status. They honored their journey, including the pain and the confusion that had brought them together in a real way. James rebuilt CyberVault with a focus on transparency and ethics. He made David a cautionary tale about how power can corrupt even the people closest to us. He established a foundation to help fraud victims. The company became not just profitable, but purpose-driven. Madison became a consultant, helping other fraud victims navigate the legal system. She used her experience and her expertise to protect others from falling victim to the same schemes that had destroyed James and Madison's relationship. James and Madison remained friends, attending each other's milestone events, supporting each other when needed, and the red dress, the dress that Madison wore to that interrupted wedding, was never worn again. Instead, it was carefully preserved as a symbol of a pivotal moment, a moment that taught everyone involved about the dangers of assumptions, about the power of truth, and about the possibility of redemption, even when everything seemed lost. Life had taken a twisted, unexpected path, but sometimes the journey to truth is more important than the destination. Sometimes the greatest love stories are not the ones that begin with perfect weddings, but the ones that are built on honest communication, forgiveness, and second chances.